Yeah.
Okay. Right, well, we'll make a start.
Yep.
It is the 4th of January, so I wish you all a happy new year, formally and on the record. And we'll back straight on. Apologies for absence, and I know that we've had one from Councillor Jones, who unfortunately we have been advised has gone down with COVID for the second time. So we wish him a speedy recovery.
Yes.
Councillor Davies, we haven't heard from.
No, he did answer an email earlier, so I was assuming he would be coming.
Hopefully we'll get
Okay.
him.
Well, here at 8, because we were talking about that, wasn't
Yes, whether he's taken a unilateral decision to arrive late because of my email, I don't know. But we'll make a start, as I say. Representations of interested parties, not aware of any. Nobody else here. Declarations of interest, if any. Disclosable pecuniary interests from anyone? Any other interests from anyone?
Not really, not related to these.
Good. So, minutes of the meeting that were held on the 7th of December have been circulated. Present at that meeting were myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Arnold, and Councillor Davis. Can I ask somebody if they're happy to propose them? Councillor Chesser, yes. Give you a direction. Seconded from Councillor Arnold, but the three of us will say yes. Good. This is a bit nonsense, isn't it? Right.
That was a tricky meeting. Was it all right, that meeting?
Yeah. As far as I can remember, the answer is yes. There is the risk that after a while they'll blur into one another.
Well, this is a grand one. I think the best of it was we'll get all trees at one
Right,
point.
I just realised I've now dated everything the 4th of December 2021, so it was right again. 4th of January 2022.
And we start with trees.
Yeah, we do. Actually starts off with 3 trees and a variation of conditions. And at one point Lisa thought she got away with it extremely lightly because that was all she thought we got.
Up until Christmas Eve, I came to publish it on Christmas Eve, but I'll just check.
Bang.
Oh no.
That sounds like somebody.
Right. I should probably apologise to Councillor Davis if you could
Hello.
be here on time. Right, just come in and sit yourself there. Right, well, we've just done all the formal bits. Are you aware of any declarations of interest that we should be making this evening?
There's one there around the school, I think. Obviously, I work at the school, so
There is indeed. School application.
no others that spring to mind.
If you'd like to note matters of other interest, potentially. I think it appears relatively early in the agenda, but the last one is
So very barn.
the very step barn, which is the one I didn't pick up, which I saw the agenda. Sometimes show up on the portal, or it should. Right, so first one, Quality Creed Road, an ash tree. And it says here to reduce the crown by 3 to 4 metres, leaving a ½ metre and a metre of growth from previous pruning points, remove any rugged crossing branches, remove 2 small lower limbs, one on the north east side and the other on the southwest, raise crown and balance tree, ivy conservative base, raise crown to 3 metres, and then in the second one to remove a lower limb on the south side of the tree, to give a street light immediate clearance of any remaining branches. Apparently when you've read that much, you've read almost everything there is to read anyway. It appears to be in the nature of tree husbandry. I hardly need to remind councillors that our usual attitude is that we would reject tree husbandry. There seems to be no obvious reason to do so. So I would imagine this is a no objection. The next one is Prince William School, where they want to fell a sycamore to ground level. So you're just going to have to bear with me. I was trying to find my notes. There isn't much to say on this one either. The tree is described as having a large dead stem, clad in ivy, and a large area of dysfunction running from the ground to trifurcation at 1.5 metres, whatever that means. Clearly, we are usually a little bit more cautious around the felling of any trees. My suggestion is that since it appears there's a likely good reason, this is one where we should probably say that it's no objection, subject to any contrary view by the tree officer. In line with our usual.
Sycamore's not a tree that's especially endangered or anything.
Exactly. Disintegrated.
Like another one.
Try a different one. It's a good start, isn't it?
Not too enthusiastic.
I don't know, it just sort of suddenly realised it had fallen apart in my hand. And the next one is another tree. This one is in 12 New Street, a beach. Crown lift to 6 metres over the garden, removing 2 significant scaffold limbs and other smaller branches. Now the reason is described. To allow more light into the garden, which may or may not be a reason for tree husbandry. My instinct, I have to say, with that one was to do a no objection to this tree husbandry, but add the caveat subject to any contrary view of the tree officer in case he thinks that it's completely unnecessary to do this piece of work for the reason that's being given to us.
I'll agree.
Yeah.
So it isn't all going to be as straightforward. Now the next one, 6 years or so ago, I would be declaring an interest. It's 15 St Peter's Road, which is the country where I used to live. Councillors may recall that the owner of number 15 St Peter's Road is Paul Cross, a sort of architectural technician. Finally applied for and got, despite the views of this council, permission to erect a property between numbers 15 and 17, and there it is now. And just as we feared, it seems totally squeezed in and impacts the streets, but it's there, it's got permission. Curiously enough, an application's gone in to vary a condition. It's not made by Mr. Cross himself. It therefore looks as if, despite the fact that the last time I passed it, it still seemed to be for sale. But it doesn't look as if somebody is wanting to buy it, but wants to make a change. And in essence, a change to the plan, if you like, as originally published. And change is essentially to add a fascia board and as they describe it, mono-pitched porch to the front elevation. Mono-pitched meaning it just comes away from the wall. Like that. To reconfigure the rear first floor windows and to confirm the size of the Azerbelt windows. Let's take those 3 in order. Adding a fascia board and a porch to the front elevation seems to me to be entirely uncontroversial. And not a matter of which I would suggest we would have any adverse opinion. They do describe it as being grey anthracite colour to match the existing windows. The porch roof will kind of extend along slightly more than half of the building, going across, looking at it from the road, over the window on the left-hand side that's there. And as I say, that seems to me to be relatively uncontroversial. The original planning permission had a single large window at first floor level on the rear elevation, which is the elevation that looks out over what is going to be the building site for the St Peter's Road, Cottescott Road development. So they were originally going to have a single large window. They now seem to want 2 smaller rear windows at first floor level. There certainly weren't any objections on the portal when I last looked at it.
No.
I doubt that having two rear windows makes it any more likely to overlook either Mr. Cross, who after all is responsible for it being there in the first place, Peter Hadfield, who bought my house and was still living next door to it. So I doubt that we'd be that worried about that one. The one that interested me was the one about which there is virtually no detail.
Detached to
To confirm the size of as-built windows. Now, I don't know about you, but the language suggests to me that what's happened is that they haven't been built to the size that the original plans said they should have been built to. And they now want kind of retrospective permission to authorise the size of the windows as they are. Now, I may be wrong, but I can't see what else it can mean unless somebody else can think of an explanation.
No, that's what I thought it meant.
Now, if it means what I think it means, although it's not specifically put as a retrospective application, because it isn't, at least it's not done that way, they're doing it in effect to vary conditions which existed presumably around the size of the original windows, no doubt for good reason. So I just wondered whether councillors were potentially concerned about that, because it would be an option to say, I suppose, that we object to that variation on the grounds that if they've been built otherwise than in accordance with the originally authorised plans, they should be replaced with windows of the sites that were originally authorised rather than necessarily allowing an alteration. But I can't, frankly, come up with a great deal more. I suppose I could have tried to study the plans for the original application and contrast them with this one and work out that aspect. Now, I did that for the rear windows to understand what that meant, and hence the fact that I could see we had one big window, now we have two rear windows. But trying to figure out whether the sizes are different is a wholly different ballgame. Looking at plans like that.
Why don't we put it to them? Because they want planning permission, but we're saying, well, give us the information that you need. Because it's not for, I mean, you don't have the time to.
No.
It does sound as if they want confirmation that it's okay to.
Albeit that it wasn't done the way
Exactly.
on the face of it should be. So my suggestion would be that in terms of this application, we say there's no objection to the patient board and
Yes.
porch, there's no objection to the first floor windows, but that if this means that the windows as constructed for the other windows are not as the size that they were supposed to be, then we do object to them simply being altered.
I think that's fair.
It seems to be three.
Yeah, it
so
goes on.
nodding.
And what's the detached?
So object.
That's the original application, isn't it?
Is it?
That's
Oh,
how the original
well,
application was described.
Thank you.
It's on the original one, looking at it, I've just put it up, it shows one big window,
That's the one at the rear.
Yeah.
And now it's
and now
two,
it's the
two
two,
small ones.
two small ones.
Let's put that.
And
And that's nice and easy.
I'm
And
assuming that's going to be a balcony, wasn't that?
With the
I think
line.
they're like a kind of
Looks like
Juliet
a
balcony
Juliet
type
balcony.
thing on the original one, which isn't there now.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't actually describe that as being a variation, it's golf, it's implicit. In fact, with two conventional windows, you wouldn't need or be able to have a balcony. The next application, having said that, is one of the more interesting ones, and it's the one that I put up on last because it finished up on the agenda. And I haven't seen it prior to that. And it's the what's described as the Berrystead barn. If we could get to that one, and the number appears to be
1809.
01809, but possibly go to 01810 LBC. I usually go to the LBC version rather than anything else. And actually, there's a design and access and heritage statement.
So are we on the Berrystead farm then?
We are.
I haven't quite followed that.
Right, so we're on to the Berrystead farm, which seeks a listed building consent. And if we can get to so we go to documents and get up the design and access statement, because it's really quite useful. Right, here we go. So that there is indeed the very stead barn. I tried to do this, but I think it's easy. So this is the very stead barn. Of itself, that is grade 2 listed, but it's part of the complex, if you like, and of course the very stead itself is a grade 1 listed building. If you just scroll through that, just keep going for the time being. So there we get a little kind of plan that's showing where everything is. And then we get that one. Now, this is worth just noting. So we've got the Bury Stead barn, and we've got what's called Scott House. Basically, the two fit together, which becomes important as we move on. So if you can move on, I think we'll recognise that. There's the Bury Stead. This is Scott House. And that, incidentally, this doorway we're going to see again, because one of the alterations they're planning is to create a new doorway that looks like that. So if we go on, that's simply the location, and it's kind of showing its location within the conservation area itself. So there again we have the property, and here we can see the Scott House bit with that entrance. And there's the barn itself. There's again 2 more elevations of the barn. Keep going. There's just some general pictures showing the courtyard area. There's the front entrance to Scott House. And if we just keep going, they're not actually planning to do anything in the roof space, incidentally, although they sort of kind of talk about reserving the right to do something with it in due course, but it's not for now. Forget about it, the flooding, don't really need to worry too much about that. And so some internal pictures, perhaps this is of some interest. So there's Scott House, there's that doorway, which as you can see is effectively glazed, with a door in the middle of it. Keep going. Don't worry too much about it. Right. On the left-hand side is the existing. So here's Scott House. There. Here's the barn here, which hopefully they push as being empty because it's not currently in use.
I know the people that moved out, it was being used as a residence.
Yes, it was converted
Yeah.
to a residence, but it's now empty and it's not used in effect as anything. But they want to bring it into beneficial use to extend the facilities of Scott House, which is a day house, 4 years, 7 and 8. Apparently there's 80 currently, and the idea is that it may increase to 100. So over here, essentially they're going to knock through here to join them in to one another, and then create an entrance and exit up here. There's going to be another entrance exit there.
Yeah.
And although it's not clear from the way that they described the works, I take it that where they put X's, essentially those are no longer going to be
That's my impression.
any form of entrance, exit or opening. And that is, I suspect, in many respects, the key part of it. So it reorders this area so it can be incorporated in effect into Scott House. If we go on beyond that now, we get some quite useful elevations. That one that doesn't help us very much. Keep going. Right.
The other ones.
So, existing, proposed. One of the things you'll notice is the windows, currently rather modern looking, somewhat out of place, replaced by something that looks a little bit more period, if I can call it that. and that particular entrance becomes a more solid wooden timber door. But in effect, from there across is the same. So there's nothing fundamentally changing about stories. If you go on to the next set of elevations, again,
to the doors.
you'll see a change in as much as we get. So here, which I think is, let's get myself right. Can you go again?
It's the one above.
Yeah, no, sorry, forget that one.
Yeah.
This is what I'm trying to look at.
Yeah.
So instead of that window, you now have a door. Those windows, if you like, become changed to what might be called something more in keeping. And again, from there across, it's essentially the same. And one more, I think you'll find, is it when not it?
Is that one?
It's this one, yeah.
It's just
It's
that
this.
size.
So here, where you can see there isn't, in essence, an opening, we now get a glazed door matching the Scott House one there with a window, and we get this door replaced with something that's somewhat more solid, and the windows are altered. And in fact, instead of that being a kind of ground up type window, we now have just a conventional window. It struck me that unless there was something about those works that upset the conservation officer,
Exactly.
it seemed to me that actually what was proposed was very sympathetic,
Yes.
brought that building back into
Use.
beneficial use, and I couldn't see any real reason to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So totally agree.
So no objection subject to any country view.
Thanks for going through that. That was,
Yes.
Yeah, that was
I do like the person. I think that's
right. Well, now this one is interesting. I mean, sufficiently so that we're going to get the pictures up. This is building on land adjacent to Pexley Court. And this number is 01790 full. Councillors may recall this isn't the first time that we've been asked to look at the development of this piece of land. And we weren't very happy with it before, primarily because they wanted to put a number of properties on it, and it was going to take out a number of trees, and the combination of the two things did not appeal. Well, they've now come back with plans for a single dwelling. And to say that this is a kind of magnificent, somewhat unusual looking dwelling would be to put it mildly. So, again, I think if you actually go to, actually, I would think actually, if you go to the proposed elevation,
If you go to the design and access statement,
Yeah.
that gives a good picture.
it does, but just again to give
Yeah.
you some idea before we even look at that.
Quite nice.
So, this is one building.
Yes.
And as you can see, it's going to be on kind of multiple levels. And the only two-storey bit is at that end,
Which is the top end of the
Which
road.
is- if you like, closest to Bennefield Road, but some way away because it's at the back of the garden of number 62. So that's that bit. And there's the sort of parking area. I think from memory there's places for 4 cars. But that's the only kind of double-storey bit that's there. Now, if you go to the design and access statement, so there we can see it from, if you like, the bottom end, looking back up at it. And again, it's probably worth. There's a lot of, I can't remember what there is in terms of drawings.
It wasn't nice to see anything you've got. That's your drawing those.
I
Everything
think
else is.
that might well be it. Yeah, there wasn't anything. That's why I couldn't remember what the drawings were. Now,
Couldn't say the location plans and all.
yeah, actually the location plan, oh, so there's a full plan which we just had up there, but, there is the location.
Yes.
Oh, right, that is joined, that's cool. Yeah, I was right, it's a parking on site for 4 cars. Yeah, there we go.
And turning, it said, and
Yeah, well, it's quite a long space actually. So here's Petrie Court, and here's a new entrance.
Yes.
And so looking at it, this is the 2-storey building.
Yeah.
Here's car parking and turning area, so they can accommodate 4 cars, which doesn't look unreasonable given the size of it. And then the building itself kind of stretches down there. Now, as I say, it's an unusual design, but in terms of a use of the site, it has the advantage that there's only one vehicle, one property being serviced off Bexley Road. It also involves the removal of fewer trees. If you look at one note, design and access statement is supplemented by a tree protection survey. The statement refers to 6 trees, bear in mind this is written by the applicant, on the applicant's behalf, which they describe as of low importance and condition, being removed principally around the access point, with no trees subject to a TPO or considered important, again, by the applicant, being harmed or removed, and all hedging, frontage and perimeter hedging remaining unchanged except for the access point. It's a 5-bedroom property sitting basically centrally within the breadth of the site, running south, principally single-storey, small 2-storey block at its northern end, housing master bedroom with an ensuite, walk-in wardrobe and a balcony, and another ensuite bedroom at first floor level, over 3 ensuite bedrooms at ground floor level. Constructed of coarse limestone with timber boarding, roof would be a slate or where flat roofed, single ply roof membrane, windows and doors either aluminium or UPVC. I don't know what councillors feel. One obvious possible way of looking at it, bearing in mind that our previous objection was fairly substantially around the loss of trees.
yeah, that's
And
right.
this purports to have minimal impact.
There
It
is
might
a
be
tree-
to say that unless the tree officer has concerns about
Yeah.
what is now being proposed in terms of the trees that are to be removed, I'm not sure there'd be any other real basis for objecting to it.
No,
What do others feel?
I agree.
The only thing was the display, and I drove down there today actually, so it's quite a narrow road.
It is.
It's just display getting into the site where I was trying to work out in my own head how you drive into it. And I think I read what the highways commented on about display, so that's the only thing that would concern. I like the idea that there's so many trees being retained, because in terms of the number, there was quite a lot of trees on the site.
I've been looking at the
Yeah,
variety,
a good variety, and it would be a shame to see
sycamore
a lot of them go. And again, there's only 6, when I think it's about 16, 17 T that's still there. My thing would be making sure that on the highway, there are cars that can, because I walk that bit quite a bit, there are cars that park along that bit of Bexley Court, where the entrance for the site is going to be. So that would be my flag would be ensuring that obviously we follow what highways are saying, but they need to make sure that egress and is allowed properly. Because it's quite narrow, it's not like a normal, it's not like my road, it's a road for 2 cars comfortably, it's a lot narrower. To accommodate the 5 houses that are already down there. But apart from that, I think it enhances the site.
There's 27 trees, but that's the survey.
Never mind.
It looks like some James Bond villain type thing, isn't it, really?
Enhance the site, knowing what the site's like.
Well, I mean,
It's an amazing structure.
it is an interesting structure, for reasons that we'll come on to later. The 2018 design statement, years ago.
We spent a lot of time.
Which we spent a lot of time on. Now, it's actually a very comprehensive document, that one, and it's quite difficult to apply that to each and every application. All of that
Shall we look at that?
later this evening. But I have to say my gut instinct was, well, it's very different, but I can't see that it has any adverse impact on anywhere.
No.
Including, I think, of the existing houses in Bexley Court.
Yeah.
It's sufficiently far away and it's sloped because it's largely single story.
Well, it's predominantly a bungalow, isn't it?
Predominantly, it
Lots
is,
of it.
apart from the sort of accommodation
Yeah.
bedroom block at the
Yeah.
far end. So Councillor Davis's suggestion is that perhaps adding to what I just said about the use of the tree observers, we should also say that subject to highways being satisfied as to the adequacy of the access and egress from the property and the parking arrangements onto Bexley Court. Do others feel that that would be adequate?
Very happy.
Yeah.
So, no objection, subject times 2. Right,
Next time we can always do one of our re-welcomes. And that it's not going to entail so many trees being.
well, I think we could welcome, I mean, I'm quite happy to add to
I
the response that we
think
welcome the
that's-
fact that it's now going to be a single
Yeah.
dwelling on the site
Yes, absolutely.
Maintain and retaining.
and retaining a significant
So-
part of
so-
the existing
And in a
tenancy.
way, they have to keep it, you see.
Yeah.
They won't then be able to sneakily try
Yeah,
and
that's
do
good.
some
They-
trees.
they-
I think-
knock that one down.
Yeah, I have to say, looking at it, I don't see that it would be capable of then having another property built anywhere within
No,
the grounds of it,
big
with
ones on.
that development. But yes, I think that's a valid point.
That's
So,
very good.
so we'll have Councillor Jess's comment as well. We welcome the fact that there's going to be a single property on there with loss of trees, etc. Or what appears to be minimal loss of
Ameliorate
trees.
whatever the word is you want to use, lots of trees.
Right, the next one's not so very far away, but on the other side of the road. 5 Herons Wood, replacement of an existing pyramid-style garage roof with a gable-ended pitch roof. I almost felt like having run down there to look at what a pyramid-shaped roof actually looked like in practice, because I was sort of wondering whether I got the right mental image of it. The point, basically, of the application is not just a roofing exercise. The point is to create a room. It's described as a loft storage area. It is completely detached from the rest of the building.
Oh, there it is.
And there indeed it is. And what perhaps is of note is what you can see on the right-hand side at the top.
Yes,
Because it has an external staircase to enable access to the property. Now it's going to be roofed using existing slates to match the main property. A couple of roof lights in the south elevation, but they're facing towards the property itself, the owner's property, so it's not like it's overlooking to anybody else's. The gable's going to be used coarse rubble to match existing pitch, is sort of similar to the pitch in the main building and so on. And the only thing that occurred to me, and it's simply because I've seen a similar application on another council where I happened to sit, where somebody was doing something almost identical. And the issue that arose was the external staircase. and the fact that it was felt that from the top of the external staircase there were overlooking issues, because as people went up and down, they could look over into other properties. Now, if you could get a location or site plan up. Sorry. One disadvantage from Lisa's point of view of us using this as extensively as we are is that you're up and down a lot. It's good exercise.
It's only because I can't see. I could do it from there if I could see it properly.
Yeah,
I can't
absolutely.
see it though.
So, I don't know, I'm sure there is one, but I can't.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
In terms of being helpful,
So it's facing its own property.
yeah, well, certainly the roof lights are facing it, and it looks like a staircase.
And those are the properties to the right-hand side of it. So if you're on the top of that stairs, you'll see
Yeah.
over into the garden.
That seems to be the possible issue to me, as to whether or not there is a potential overlooking issue. And the way that was overcome in Gladstone was that a condition was appended to the permission, which essentially said you've got to have a solid screen around the outside staircase, so that as you go up the staircase, essentially you can't see into anybody else's property. So we might, if we feel that it's an issue and it's worth doing, say that we wouldn't object, subject to the imposition of a condition around screening the external stairway if there is perceived to be an issue with overlooking. Now again, when I looked at the portal, it now was quite a few days ago, there were no comments on the from the neighbouring owners or anybody else raising an issue, but it did strike me that because there could also be a bit of a precedent about this, because you'll see later that there's a very, very similar plan for another gauge that crops up. And I think it's drawn by exactly the same person, although this one doesn't have an external staircase.
Oh, those are the big houses, aren't they?
But maybe we should be thinking about putting down a marker about external staircases if they create a potential overlooking issue. And
Yes, there was one in the marketplace, wasn't there? Near to the bookshop. If you go in the yard, behind what is now the sewing shop, they had one, didn't they?
Right.
Yeah.
I specifically can recollect, but anyway. So,
I do know the people that, so I should know. Simon didn't quite. But they're nice. Very nice.
not sure we should necessarily note that, but I think we perhaps ought to note it as another interest if the applicants and owners.
As in they're being reasonable.
So, excluding Councillor Fuller, who's decided to declare an interest and sit back on it to an extent, does anybody else have the same issues with it as I have expressed, or are you just happy with it?
The thing I'd say was there any capacity to have the stairs on the inside in terms of aesthetically, but then take up space for what they're probably trying to achieve inside.
Yeah, because I think they'd have to then make the whole structure bigger. This way, they use the existing structure and the existing footprint, but just add this around it. And actually saying we would be worried unless it was internal means that we're basically saying go away and do it again, making a completely new garage with it. Which we may be. There's nothing wrong with that approach.
If you look at
there are
satellite, it might help.
Right.
It's this building,
Right.
not that one, it's there. I think if you look at the satellite, it might actually help with the judgment.
I don't think this is a problem.
Yeah. It's that building
I haven't done the satellite approach, which
there.
actually
That's
perhaps
why
would
we
have
lost
been,
it, I know that.
which perhaps would have been a logical thing for me to do.
I always do that, I just check. Do you want to have a closer look?
I'm guessing a distinct way that actually nobody's got an issue with this.
Oh, I know that.
we basically happy with?
Yeah.
Right, after all that, let's say more again. But at least it's been had a proper discussion. Right, 50 West Street, no, it's not 58 West Street, which is another listed building application. However, it's not a hugely dynamic one. So there's a flat roof, and they want to put in what's described as a lantern light, which in a sense is one that kind of projects upwards on that flat roof. And they want to replace 2 windows and put in a new door to the rear of that property.
Is this opposite the dentist?
Right,
It's 50.
I think it's the one that I accidentally described as 50 West Street on my note when it should have said 58 West Street. So just
No, it's further down.
It's the one with the nice balustrade
Oh,
on the
it's
top as you walk through to Dampist.
yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
Left-hand
So,
side on the right.
Yeah.
Left-hand side.
left-hand side as you look at
It
it.
looks
from
double
West Street.
fronted, doesn't it?
So the property itself,
oh,
the property's grade 2 listed.
That's
That's
not
58 West Street and in the conservation area. And as it says in my note, to the left of the arch passageway to Danfords, described in the design and access and heritage statement as having fallen into disuse and being unoccupied. Focus of the work is on the 20th century extension, with some incongruous works, again, bear in mind this is the applicant's design and access statement, words not mine, being removed in the process of altering the facilities and the circulation. I think I'm right in saying this is Mark Ben's.
Yeah, it is.
The existing layout of the historic main house interior remains as is. The main historic part of the building lies to the northern end facing West Street, with the 20th century flat roof extension to the south. Within this part of the building, there's a living room at ground floor level, a bedroom at first floor level, and a second bedroom at second floor level. On the ground floor, existing bathroom and store to be removed, kitchen area reordered with a shower room being created with new partition walls. In doing so, all existing services reinstated in close matching materials as far as is possible. Large 20th century window to the west elevation to be taken out, replaced with a small traditional flush with lintel casement. The remainder of the open filled with facing brickwork to match the existing. Sounds a bit like the very state parliament. The existing rear doors and windows will be removed, south elevation will be restyled with a new set of conservation style bifold painted timber doors, the replacement painted timber window to the store. South elevation will be rendered to blend sympathetically with the historic stone, existing felt roof to be stripped, new lantern roof window fitted, and the roof reinstated with a single ply membrane. So there it is. I mean, obviously, if anybody wants to, there may be some more that we could look at in terms of documents. But broadly speaking, the alterations are in this area here, where this shower room is going to be created by the creation of these internal walls here. 20th century window is got rid of here, and more sympathetic window is installed and so on. So that's what it looks like from West Street. There is the 20th century extension, and that's the window that's going to be got at, essentially. And then we're going to have some doors at the back, which I think are going to go there. Seems to me that this is probably going to be another one where we're going to say no objection subject to the conservation. I do begin to sound like a stuck record with it. But I can't think of any other response. There doesn't seem to be any obvious issues.
You don't know what the walls are built on inside them.
No,
Stone walls and things like that.
I
You
think
could alter.
particularly on the internal stuff, we're going to be very heavily reliant on what the conservation officer actually feels. So we're getting through them. 13 Clifton Drive what is described as the reconfiguration of the ground floor.
I mean, I don't think this is actually a planning issue, it's more of a, well, I say planning application as such, it's more of a,
What's around it?
It's one of those ones where,
it's basically to assist you in the event that when you come to sell your house, you comply with the alterations. Almost like a, it's not a building control.
it's slightly like a building.
Yeah, it's like a building control, but basically you're complying with what the rules tell you. So when come sell your house, you can say to a prospective buyer that actually this was done in line with
This
like,
condition.
I mean, under permitted development.
Yeah.
You've done it under permitted development.
It's kind of done as permitted development rights, and to be frank,
So you can
when you
alter
actually look
anything
at what
inside.
they're doing, it's not particularly controversial. So,
There's nothing, I don't personally think there's anything for us to comment on. It's internal works which you could do to your house. without actually-
you've got living room and dining area, and essentially they're going to get rid of that entrance into the playroom there. Whoops.
Yeah, so I'm going to put the proposed one up there, yeah.
Yeah, so that entrance
Come down
disappears.
Dixon Drive.
Turn left, go past, well, no, turn left, go along, and it's on the right hand side. It's an L shape.
Right.
It's an L-shaped house. And you step down into the, if I remember, it came on
Yeah.
the way where years ago. And you step down into that lounge area, and I think
Yeah,
what
I
he's
think
trying to
that's
do,
exactly right.
he's trying to bring the level up and level it, and then just reconfigure it to make it work better as a family.
Yeah. So you've got a dining area in effect over here. You've got a slight partition wall here to separate this area off. But then this area is opened up, so you've got a very large kind of kitchen, dining area there. As I say, that door disappears. Really, it seems to me, as Councillor
I
Davis
think
says,
probably the only reason they do this is if you're taking an internal wall out and have to put lintels in.
But it's not an application for us, it's more of a,
it's, yes,
Just
to
a
make
thumbs up
sure
from
it's
them,
like-
but,
I mean,
yeah.
well, look, we've done it in appliance with what, under permitted development. It's like permitted development rights, I'm allowed to do it, and I'm letting you know I'm doing it. Can you, when the house was first built, it was built under certain criteria. Now you're asking to change it, so I'm now saying, actually, I'm doing it now under permitted rights. And they're agreeing, the authority will say, okay, that's fine, you do it, and we allow you to do it. But it's not a planning one for us, if that makes sense. That's my understanding.
which gives us the option of either a no objection or no comment. I mean, they are shown on the planning portal, we do get notified. Well, in theory, we get notified, and if something went badly wrong with something,
Yeah.
in theory, we get notified of them. I mean, my thinking is we just say no objection.
No, Johnson. I'm happy.
Right, now, strangely enough, properties. I'm trying to find the cocktails, as I say, my notes are all
Freestanding
different
garage,
order.
is this
Yes.
the one with the,
So we've got a garage.
other one?
As I mentioned, I think I'm right in saying this is the same person who has drawn the plans up for this as the one that we were looking at a minute or two ago. But there is a difference. The difference here is that instead of there being an external staircase, which actually you couldn't have because of the way in which this is configured, I think what's the best bit to look at? That's,
This is the location plan.
yeah. If you,
I've got this sat now,
yeah,
So that's Croft House there,
Yes.
East Road.
Um,
Here.
yes. I'm just trying to think, there is a.
Site plan
Where is
proposed.
yeah, if we look at the elevation proposed. Right.
Which they do.
Yeah, there we go. That's exactly what we want. So, there's nothing there at the moment. New garage with a door, a space above, and a sort of carporty area. So it's built over there, that's open. And the reason that's open is it appears that people can go to and from the property behind going through this property to access that one. So this has to be actually wide enough to take a car. Although the way it's written suggests there aren't that many car movements, but it is actually possible. But as you will see, there's no external stairway. That's because it's basically built up to 2 stone halls on either side. It basically fills the bottom end. So access is rather like it is into my loft. You have one of those pull-down ladders,
Oh, right.
and so you have to go up internally with the pull-down ladder. And that's, broadly speaking, it. I
No, really.
didn't really see that there's a lot in it. I don't know if anybody has any issues with it or concerns about it, or questions about it even. But that's what it is. Creation of this new garage with carport area and what is described as loft storage over. And clearly, given how it's going to be done, with no proper staircase and just a pull-down ladder, that's what it is going to be used for. It's not going to turn into be some sort of study or work area or something. Because I can't believe anybody is going to want to go in there and keep pulling down the ladder. We don't have a ladder to access it on a regular basis. We suspect that the loft area will be used for storage, and once things have gone up there, they might well stay there for years without having very much out. If I know anything about the way that people store stuff. Objections? Sounds like a no objection to that, doesn't it?
There's no comments on it.
No, you see. I mean, I think actually when I went through it, there were basically no issues with anything in terms of people putting up anything and saying, I don't like this because. Right, so the next one, 2 South Bridge Close, the first floor side extension.
That's a leaflet to this lot. Really? The first one
So,
second.
I think this is,
Recently sold, didn't it?
Yeah.
12 months.
although not in the conservation area, the way it's described, I think it actually abuts the conservation area. Has a common boundary with it. The existing building is brick built with concrete interlocking roof tiles, white UPV cinder windows, and the extension to be built over the existing garage on the right-hand side of the property will just be constructed using light materials. Windows to the front and rear elevations of the first floor side extension.
It's
Really, there was very little else I could actually write about it. It's a standard extension to the property. If there's a location type plan,
Site plan location.
Next to the pot,
Yeah.
isn't it? The pot,
yeah, go to
first,
the,
first one on the left is a pot house. This is next door to it.
right,
Yes.
so
Backs onto the terraces.
if you just go back that way again. So
So it's just
there we are, there is number 2, Southbridge Close.
No, butts onto the Mill Road
Yeah.
cottage.
Yeah,
What sheds were.
it does. And
Beautiful.
where's
In the summer.
the other one?
Yeah.
So,
Lot plans or
so site plan
elevation?
proposed, let's just see. I'm not sure how that one is actually.
You have to just make it smaller into.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. So
It's on the end, isn't it?
there it is, it's on that side of the property, well away from the Mill Road properties. It does, of course, bring it slightly closer to the one on the right hand side, but
It's in that
I
last.
see any obvious issue with it from my point of view.
No,
No objection?
no.
Gone seem to be the days when you had to have a space for an emergency vehicle.
Oh, is that what you had to do, the old days?
No, that wasn't the old days, yeah, no, really, that space, but now people
Now
will
people
right
build
up
up
to the,
within inches of the boundary.
to the boundary, don't they?
Oh, right, well, there was a picture which just showed you the extension of the garage.
North Street.
Right, 51 North Street, widening of existing 20th century gated entrance. Now the property itself is listed, which is why it comes in with an LBC as well as,
There you go.
albeit that what they are planning to do does not relate to like any real impact on the listed building at all. Let me find the notes here.
They're white gates at the moment, aren't they?
They are. Where is it?
Yeah, I think they'll keep them white. They're quite attractive.
Yeah, so opposite the traffic
Yeah.
lights, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one. I just want to widen it.
You know what, I can't actually, I know I looked at it, but I can't, and this, I'm going completely mad, I can't find it on my notes. As if I completely missed it. But I know I looked at it.
It's not in your notes, is
I'm
it?
trying to work out.
Oh, there it is, 51
50
North
West.
Street, yes, it is there. I think it's on page 4 of 5. 51 North Street,
There it is.
widened 20th century gated entrance.
Jeremy's old house.
So
Oh,
it's,
that far, yeah.
it's a nice little picture of it.
old house.
And as you can see, the gateway is set quite well back. And although the property is grade 2 listed, the wall and the gateway, which are set back from the road, are believed to have been constructed in or about 1992, pursuant to a permission made 30 years ago. Current gateway has twin white painted wooden gates. And then I like this, because modern motor vehicles are wider than they were 30 years ago, they actually want to widen the gateway to make it easier for vehicles to get in and out. Essentially, they want to move it 700 millimetres in order to make it just that bit wider, creating a 3.3 metre opening. But the height remains unchanged.
No problem.
There really doesn't seem to be any issue. I mean, I suppose as it's got a listed building element, we should say no objection subject to any contrary view. But if the conservation officer had a contrary view, I think probably my proverbial isn't.
Sorry.
That's sort of the case. The tree, I think, has reappeared. I think that unfortunately 12 New Street sort of crept in at the beginning and end of this, so just ignore that one, we've already dealt with it.
And now we've got the toilet.
And then we come to the Talbot.
Signs.
Signs.
And
Signs.
it's not as, in a sense, it's not as bad as it, when I first looked at it, I thought, remembering that we'd had an interesting exercise around the old market hall the other day with Fine and Country and so on. But actually, if you go to, which document was it? It must be, it's probably the
Proposed sign?
I think it's actually the design and access statement, as much as anything.
Does that show the proposed sign, does it, or not?
I can't remember without looking at it. Oh, no, that's the application itself.
Above it,
That
the
was
second one
the
down.
second one down.
There, I'm nice.
So we won't need to go into the, oh no,
There we go.
no.
It's good.
Forget this isn't helpful if I
It's
remember
not, it's not
right.
the buildings, it is.
It's,
It probably are.
Proposed
better
sign photos?
To just look at the proposed signs.
What they used to look like, and then
that's the existing.
That's the
stuff.
existing.
Yeah.
We've got signs in all sorts of locations. You'll see that they are generally black red on a white background.
And these are the new signs.
I'm going to have this
White
white
on
on black background.
Inverse.
They actually
they
look,
were quite.
I think they actually look better than the
Complement.
existing ones.
Yeah.
They are, essentially, the plan is to put them exactly where previous ones were, and
Yeah.
so far as is possible, secure them using existing.
That's what we must make
fixings.
sure of. Yeah.
They are actually going to be made of the same material, and I think they're actually wooden, which is why they've weathered somewhat, hence the idea that they want to replace the signage more or less throughout. But actually, looking at it, it looks quite smart. There are signs there anyway. they're not making them significantly larger or
I think it's really nice.
anything about the signage which would perhaps make the
That doesn't show 13 or 14 or whatever it is.
No, it doesn't.
You see, what are we not seeing?
There's two sides.
There's two lots, so if we, no, that's the existing again. Where are we?
No,
Is it just that one?
The front one we want to see, don't we?
Is that this one?
Well,
What else?
yeah, if that's what I
Is that
thought.
a different
Yeah,
one?
there you go, they've got one at the front. No, that's okay. That's it.
So
That's the new
there's
one.
hanging
That's all right.
signs, and I think that's
Look,
actually, I think,
there's 14 sides,
Some
that's
there.
the thing on the side, yeah.
so you've got that one and this one.
Nice.
Um,
Can't disagree.
I find it difficult to get very excited about what they're doing.
They're using
They're
they're
upset
using,
about what
they're
they're doing.
using the logo, aren't they, on the new one? You know, sort of the talk signage on the front, so they like enhance it.
I have to say, I think this one has, you guessed it, no objection subject to any review of the conservation officer written all over it.
Yeah, because it's new holes, isn't it? In the
Well, yes, what they've said is they're going to try and use the existing fixings wherever
Oh, they
possible.
said that.
They
said-
do, they say that very specifically.
Oh, well, then that's.
Um, I think what
They're going to
we
respect it.
want to perhaps say is that we say that on the basis that they kind of sought to reassure us that that's the case, but that will need to be monitored closely by the conservation officer, because we will be worried if in fact, having said they were going to do that, they start knocking holes all over the place. But I'm sure the conservation
I
officer
would
would have that well in hand.
trust in them. I saw a fairly old sign for the toilet on the outside. I can see it easy. But never mind, they all change.
Probably whether you can read it more easily, perhaps not necessarily a planning ground. Anyway. Rather surprisingly, we shot through that
Oh,
in an
okay.
hour, which I'm quite impressed with. However, it's not quite in this.
It's got a bit more.
Planning outcomes, you'll notice that we got a bit upset about the idea of having a property that's got kind of western tiles re-roofed in something else. We pointed to our policy that said we don't like that, and guess what, it's been refused. So, they seem to agree with us.
That's quite amazing.
Which of itself is, as you said, quite amazing. Now, there are two other substantive matters on the agenda. Councillors will recall the Mayor floated the idea of a kind of planning subcommittee, which was in the idea of a sort of advisory committee. And we then mentioned it in full council and said we'd look at it here, and we looked at it and we said essentially we'd come up with some sort of terms of reference, etc., which I cobbled together.
Is it to do with the breathing issues?
No, not specifically. The idea is to have a group which would largely consist of non-councillors
Oh, right, yes. Okay.
who perhaps have areas of expertise
Yeah.
who could help us with some of our work, if you like. But they operate, if you like, entirely under our direction, so they don't initiate anything. We tell them if we want them to look at something, they go away and look at it and come back with some advice or whatever else it is.
Like those big developments where we're sitting here scratching our
Well,
heads.
exactly, because there are sometimes cases where you're looking at 50 or 60 documents, and with the best will in the world, whilst I do try to do what I can, now, you cannot necessarily go through them, and even if I did, I don't know a lot about certain technical matters. In fact, I don't know a lot about any real technical matters, to be frank. But there might be people out there who do, and whose input might be helpful, shall we say. So, looking at it, what I suggested, and I'll just run through it very briefly, is that membership should be by invitation of this committee, open to both members of the committee and non-councillors. I don't actually suspect that very often we have members of this committee actually being part of that for obvious reasons. Otherwise, it's just, instead of decreasing our workload, it's probably doing the opposite. Non-councillor members' membership could be withdrawn by us by a majority vote of this committee. And similarly, we could invite people to do it at any point. Essentially, it lasts for the length of the council, so it is dissolved when any full council election takes place. We start fresh. I have said, not because of any megalomania or anything else, but it struck me probably necessary that the chair of this committee should be the chair of that subcommittee, but then goes on to say that in the absence of the chair, the subcommittee would elect somebody to chair a particular meeting, because I don't necessarily want to be sitting there. I suspect whoever follows me in due course won't necessarily want to be doing that. But the subcommittee would determine when and where any of its meetings will take place, and could undertake those meetings remotely. Its role, well, I say here, the planning subcommittee shall provide advice and assistance to the planning committee as and when called upon to do so by the planning committee. But the planning committee is under no obligation to seek any advice or assistance from it. So it's entirely up to us what we ask it to do and when, if anything. The scope of any advice and assistance which the planning subcommittee might be asked to provide shall be determined by a majority voters of this committee. Planning subcommittee could meet in private or publicly, but wouldn't be required to publish an agenda before meetings, but it should provide an agreed minute after meetings. The one that I'm a little less certain about, I put here, all members of the planning subcommittee should be required to declare at any meeting of the planning subcommittee whether they have or might be perceived to have a financial or other interest in any matter under discussion, and any interest declared shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. But then I've said, but no member shall be required not to participate in any discussion on or any vote on any matter in which they might have declared an interest. In other words, their position is somewhat different to ours because they are largely going to be non-councillors. But bear in mind, if their role is to provide us with advice, when it comes back here, we are all subject to the rules. We have to declare interests as various councillors have done during the course of the season, for example. And I thought that would probably be sort of almost sufficient for a starter. Councillor.
The only thing I'd like to add is this is obviously an experiment, isn't it?
Very much so.
So,
I mean, it was the mayor's suggestion,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, actually, I can see some potential merit in harnessing outside abilities. I've already tangentially mentioned something which I'm going to mention in a minute, subject
so
to views generally.
I think we should review their existence every year.
Yeah, we could do that. Well, in a sense, on the basis that we can terminate people's membership at any point.
Well, it's
we
the
could,
actual
we could add in that. So that currently we could say that
To be reviewed.
continued existence will be reviewed annually by this committee. No problem with that.
I would prefer to call it something like a panel, because in a way, we're a subcommittee of the council.
Subcommittee. Well, I did,
So
funny
there's
enough,
room for complication.
I did agonise a little bit about whether or not we should call it something like the Planning Advisory Committee or something like that.
You took it.
Oh, sorry, that's
I felt it go over to him.
I'm saying the same thing,
No,
Yeah.
because if I can just finish what I was saying.
Yes, sorry.
When it was put to me by the there, it was more about having, if you like, a list of people
Yeah.
that we feel could be of help or benefit. And therefore, if we form, in my view, a formal subcommittee now,
Yes.
then that's giving it too important a role. That it should be something that we call upon when we need it, rather than being a formal.
Yeah,
I think-
because otherwise people move up their station.
Yes,
Right.
well, it's,
Yes.
I think I felt the same. I think my understanding was that it was going to be a group, as Val's explained, an
Yeah.
advisory group that would
Yeah.
advise this committee for us to make decisions for it to go to the main committee. And so, and it would be those people that we would invite, once we got some terms of reference. So I personally wouldn't see it as a subcommittee of the planning. I would see it as an advisory to our meeting.
Yeah.
And not necessarily full council, because we're
I would
advising.
be in favour of something.
And then obviously the other question I would ask is that, what makes it chorus as such? Is it
Yeah.
so many number? Is it all of us?
You'll notice
Is it
that
a group?
I
I know it isn't
didn't
there.
mention.
But that's why I've mentioned it here.
Does it need to be called?
Well,
That's the
that
point.
was my thinking.
Is it chair and another councillor, at least a minimum of two?
There ought to be a
councillors?
minimum,
A minimum of two
so
so
that
many
it doesn't
councillors.
become a little,
And then you've got admin requirements, and then you've got if you're going to call it, are you going to have an expert in architecture? Are you got an expert in planning?
We do have our expert in architecture.
Well, we do, yeah, we do. I take that as
more in a
one.
minute.
I didn't see it as a subcommittee, I saw it as an advisory.
I looked at our standing orders, because they have been revised. There was a time when our standing orders specifically referred to advisory committees.
Yeah.
As
exactly.
far as I can see, it doesn't anymore. Standing order 4A says, unless the council determines otherwise, a committee may appoint a subcommittee whose terms of reference and members shall be determined by the committee. Members of the committee may include non-councillors, unless it has something to do with council finances, it goes on to say. Unless the council determines otherwise, all the members of an advisory committee and a subcommittee of the advisory committee may be non-councillors. So although the heading says committees and subcommittees, and it talks about committee may appoint a subcommittee,
But that's
bizarrely, it later then refers specifically to an advisory committee or even a subcommittee of
Like that.
advisory.
I read that as the overarching, is the council.
Yes.
And then the council then make us a subcommittee in all the different areas of business, like we've got estates, like we've got
Yeah.
finance, like whatever else. That's why the fourth paragraph says then advisory, because that falls below the original, like we're sitting here as a subcommittee,
Yeah.
aren't we? We're sitting, yes, we're the planning committee,
Yeah.
but we're a
There is
subcommittee
some
that involves
committee
the
of the
council.
council.
So which is why I think we're still right to have the group as an advisory committee, or advisory group to the subcommittee, which is planning,
Absolutely.
if that makes sense.
And as we called on, not set up formally.
Yeah.
No, we don't want to
Every
be
time we
meeting
have an
unless
election, we've got to set them up, you know.
All right, so I kind of agonised about that, as I said, and the words advisory committee had occurred to me. So let's call it an advisory. Well, let's call it advisory group.
I like panel.
As long
Advisory
as,
panel.
as long,
Well, panel, I like
all
panel
right,
too.
advisory panel. As long as the clerk doesn't have a problem with it under the terms of our standing orders, I did copy her into this, but of course that went out during the Christmas New Year break. So she hasn't got the time. But what we could do is simply, when we have our planning report to full council in a couple of weeks' time, I can explain that we've had this discussion, this is what we want to do, if the clerk's got a problem with it. Hopefully between now and then, she and I will have sorted it. So we'll call it an advisory panel, and we should probably say that there should be some sort of quorum. Just see what happens.
I know I'm probably jumping the gun a bit, but are there people that you have in mind, the council, of?
I think the short answer was certainly the mayor had certain people in mind, and after he floated it round in my direction, and as you've heard also Councillor Chessers, for example, I think we all started to think of certain names of people. For example, Mark Pence's name we mentioned, who's the guy who essentially, for all intents and purposes,
I think there's a point that we could
drew
utilise,
that document.
social media and say, we have a planning application. I think we use it to our advantage. We have a planning application, we've got an advisory planning group. We would like an expert in this particular area to give us a hand with this application.
Right.
There it goes. We then, one or two of us speak to that person, find out what their skill set. They come on the group, they advise the committee, and then we then in a better informed position than when it might be somebody that goes and speaks on our behalf with somebody.
Well, there's things
our
like-
committee,
From
anything
the
like that.
museum, you've got that body, the heritage body, haven't you?
You've certainly got that, and you've got people who are involved with, say, Transition Outdoor. You've got Tony Hoyle, who does our rights of way, etc., because that could be impacted by development.
There are people who work in planning
Um,
for different authorities in the area.
Yes, we've
There
got
are
lots of expertise.
there are three, I know, there are two planning officers I know who work for a different county, who live in town, and they're very pro on what happens in town.
But we're not looking for, I don't think, I hope not, a body to monitor what we do.
No, absolutely not. Tails and dogs come
That
from
needs to be,
Yes.
that somehow, that, have you written that?
That needs to be in the,
If you,
Well, I mean, I made the point that it shall provide advice and assistance as and when called upon to do so.
Yeah.
We're under no obligation to ask for it.
Yeah.
And the scope of the advice and assistance we ask for is a matter for us.
Okay.
that covers
So, which I think covers it, basically. I mean, there is an element of suck it and see
it. I still
about it.
like the review every year, because
Um,
it may or may not work.
Well, what I'm going to suggest is this. If I make sure that this comes up at full council, who can then express a view on what we've now emerged with, which is my draft with some changes. If at that point the principle is accepted, then at our February meeting, we'll then start looking at specific individuals who we might want to involve. And one of the things that instantly struck me was, I mean, Mark Benz obviously has expertise, but that document, so much work went into it. We do say in our planning guidance that we have regard to it, but for obvious reasons it hasn't been reviewed or updated. Now, I don't know, Mark may not no longer have the time or inclination to do it, but he certainly ought to be asked.
Yes.
So he'd be right up there on my list of people to approach in general terms, but also there's a very specific piece of work there that maybe he could play some role with.
but in my understanding of what the mayor said was that it's not about forming a group of people
It's
who
not
then
calling upon.
get time, who are given, if you like, you've got so many tasks to do. It's about, we need some help on this particular,
Which is why, in a sense, I highlighted that. There's a specific piece of work
Yeah.
that I don't think any of us around this table are capable of doing because it's not our area of expertise. But as it were, I know a man who can, potentially.
yeah, if we decide that we.
If we decide to go down this route at all,
Yeah.
I think the probability is that full council will say, give it a go.
Yeah,
And I suspect what happens, we'll come up with some names in February, we'll approach them after that meeting, and we'll review where we're at in March. This isn't going to happen overnight, doesn't it?
Doesn't,
Quite frankly.
Oh, can I make a suggestion that for the council, you give us a suggestion of some of the people you would invite? Because I think that would make it so.
Fine, in that case, could I suggest anybody who has any names, stroke details, and you've mentioned, for example, some people, could you let me have their names and broad areas of expertise, and that applies to anybody?
You'll just whet their appetite, so yeah.
Absolutely,
It's massive.
because I don't want to just mention Mark Benson. But I've already come up with Mark Benson, there's Mark Felton, there's
Well, I
David
don't
Wood,
know.
there's Tony Hoyle, there's 4 names, straight off the top of my head, who have helped us and have particular areas of expertise, but there are others that not there, I am sure.
I shall speak with them.
And then you just suggested, well, what about somebody from We used to have the historic buildings group.
Well, I don't know what
There is a lot of talent in the town that we actually
There
don't,
is, remarkable.
actually don't
Hey,
touch.
what's that? Who's that museum trustee that retired last time? Has been replaced. It's like the historical society. We'll call it the historical society. You know, there's a
What do you
You mean John
John Hadman.
John Hadman?
no. It's not John.
or,
No, but-
Robin?
Yes, I think there's a
Robbie, well, I mean, they're retired because they want to be retired.
no, but there are still people doing it, isn't there? Because in the museum you've got the museum, then you've got us, and you've got this other.
Yes, well, and you've got, obviously on the museum committee, you've got Carol Hancock Turner, who chairs the
Museum management.
Museum Management Committee. I'm frantically to think of the term. And then there's Carmel and so on. So, again, the museum might be an obvious group
Yeah,
to
that's
approach.
very true.
I mean, I wonder as well if you've ever got an application that impacted upon St Peter's, somebody from the Friends of Aaron Parish Church, for example, might be somebody who would want to draw into our discussions and if they might help. Nobody's forced to. So that was the thinking anyway, so.
We also need a green, because we're moving into the green area. And we've got
Well, it
these
struck
new
me that
developments that we have.
Councillor Jones, who unfortunately isn't with us
No,
tonight,
he probably knows
but
something.
he is
Ideal.
a bit of a green champion, shall we say. So it may be, and I've deliberately left it open to councillors from this committee.
Okay.
I have to say that was partially with him in mind. It's just unfortunate he's not here tonight, but it did strike me that either he or maybe people he is in touch with could provide us with some.
I mean, there's,
We haven't got to rush out, you know, and get loads of people.
Absolutely
Form
not.
some-
I mean,
form
to
some-
some extent,
They're all going to be having monthly meetings and all.
well, there was a, for
well, they're
example,
not
Ought to
going
be
to
a
have
lot
monthly
more.
meetings because we're going to tell them precisely what we
Yeah.
want them to look at.
it's a, for example, we've got 3 developments that are going to put 300 houses now. You talk to the RSC, they're now talking about young drivers don't bother learning manual, go for automatic, because by the time you get a car, it's going to be an electric car, and therefore you're going to be automatic. So that's what the RSC is saying. So why aren't we building houses with charging points? And there's an infrastructure thing about that, because these new developments, they should all have charging points with their solar panels and everything else. So this is a big change, but it's not coming from the government.
Now,
It's just a thought, that's just one of those what ifs.
right. Well, we'll move that one on
Yep.
in the way we've discussed. Now, there's one other matter that I've put on the agenda because the council was approached by somebody interested in acquiring the riverside. And it would appear that he is interested in purchasing it for use as a private residence. Now, all the things that have come before us over the years, the only thing I can't think of that has come before us is any application to convert it into a private residence. Hotels, motels, office spaces, you name it, have at times come before us, at times permission has even been granted, nothing's ever happened. The guy seemed to want some kind of an indication from the town council as to whether we were likely to have an issue, for example, with a change of use to residential. And I said, well, it seemed to me that the logical place to bring it was here. In terms of my sixpence worth, it seems to me that anything which would bring that property back into beneficial use, almost,
Yes.
would be preferable to it sitting there for another 30 years in its current state. And if that meant that it became a private residence rather than anything else, I think it's a lost commercial opportunity, but on the other hand, right across the other side of the road, the former A1 reclaim site now houses a housing development. what would be the issue? Now, technically, of course, it's not actually an Arundel parish, but he has asked our opinion. And if there was an application, it would come before us, even though it's technically a matter for Ashton themselves.
There's quite a lot of land attached.
Be a big garden,
It would be very, very big.
Football pitch.
very wet there.
It's,
I tell you what, you have beautiful views there, haven't you?
For me, I was just saying, we welcome your application. Let's see what it looks like. Because I'm with you, I think for all the years, even before the bypass was built, you look at it as it was put, and then it became derelict as such. It can only enhance the look of the town.
How long is it that it's not been?
Oh,
4 years?
I mean, I
It's
came
weird,
here
isn't
in
No, it's
81,
20
Right, is it?
and
30
it
years.
would be nearly, it was open then, but I
Yeah.
don't think it was open for very long.
yeah, it's about,
So I would
20.
suggest it was the early 80s, so it's the best part of 30 years, and it's sat there with absolutely nothing
It's
happening.
nice. It's the worst thing.
And it is.
Well, if you think about it, we had that pub, and then you cross the river, and you've got where the brewery is now, and then you cross that going, and you have where Waitrose is, which is done. So what's happened is that sorted itself out. The brewery area sorted itself out. We just need to sort out that incredible house. I have no problems.
The station building's lovely.
Yeah, where's the house?
To do the other one, I welcome his or her application.
I'd like a James Bond.
Welcome his application.
So
yeah,
It's just rubbish at the moment.
It's whether he can get it away from the estate, I suppose.
well, yes, I mean,
Good luck.
I suppose, well, normally I'd say everything has its price, but I
Yeah.
do wonder with them, because they seem to have been so resistant. I just wonder what their agenda ultimately is.
Sorry, who owns that?
It's the Rothschild
Rothschild
estate.
estate. Sorry.
Half of the other land, half from Mr.
Yes, Charles.
The school, Mr.
Lane,
Lane.
yes, thank you.
Who lives in Jersey.
Okay.
So, whilst we couldn't prejudge an application, because I think we'd have to say that, nevertheless, we are so concerned about the fact that it is laying derelict for the best part of 30 years,
Just on foot.
that it is likely that were any application
should be looked at.
to enable it to be brought back into beneficial use, it is likely to be looked at reasonably favourably.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Something along those lines?
You can't commit, but you can say,
No, we can't.
please.
We haven't seen it.
Do you, Lisa, do you want to put something together and have a look at it, and I'm happy we can arrange for Emma perhaps to send it?
Yeah.
Simply as an
That's a
indication.
lot of
In fact, we've had a brief discussion about it, and that's our kind of snap gut reaction to it. If you can have a snap reaction to something that's been like that for 30 minutes. Right, 9 o'clock, let's finish.
Nothing to do.
Just in view of what happened tonight, we probably should elect a deputy, just in case something like this happens again, because we never got around to doing it, did we? We deferred it.
Didn't. Well, it isn't strictly speaking on the agenda.
So do you want to
However,
next?
why don't we put it on the agenda for next time? It doesn't commit us to doing it. The last time we looked at it, we took the view that we were relatively short in numbers. We've actually increased by.
Can I make another suggestion? I don't know if it's within standing orders, but rather than elect a deputy, because they might not be there either, why don't we do what you were going to suggest that we do, that when we have a meeting and you're not there, we elect for that
Well,
meeting.
that is what the standing
I think
orders
that's
currently
right.
provide, that in
And I'm
the
happy
absence
That's fine.